U.S. national reckoning. With the United States going through a national reckoning over racism, the country's socio-political ambience is gravid with development and change, not just in the police department, but also in the country's entire justice system. The police killing of yet another black man, Rayshard Brooks, this time in the state of Atlanta, has boosted the resolve to battle racism, deep-rooted within America.
Don't move your head. Keep your head still. Follow with just your eyes. Do you understand? You understand? Let the drink to be dry. Put your hands on your back for me. Here, put your hands on your back. Hey, stop fighting! Stop fighting! Stop fighting! Stop fighting! You're gonna get tased! You're gonna get tased! Stop! Mr. Ross! Stop! Come on, man! Stop! You're gonna get tased! Mr. Ross! Hands off the fucking taser! Hands off the taser! Stop fighting! Hands off the taser!
But away from the streets, the latest movement in America is already showing its influence in the politics of the United States, as well as how the people perceive the issue of race and real effects of inequality on socio-political equations.
It's not just about showing up to protest. It's about, having those hard conversations with your fellow white people. It's about, having those conversations with your family about anti-Blackness and the police, and getting ready to challenge people's notions about policing in this country, because white folks are raised to believe that, cops keep them safe, and they do. But I think, white folks, especially folks who are wanting to do more change, that burden is really on you to have those hard conversations with your family and friends.
Passions are meanwhile high in the nationwide demonstrations, one notable instance of which transpired in Seattle's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which the protesters occupied. Thousands of angry demonstrators packed the area known as CHAZ, which stands for Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHOP, which stands for the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest, triggered by a white officer's killing of George Floyd.
I think it's an amazing social experience. What I think is going on is that people are uniting. Seattle is different than any other city I've ever been to. People are uniting on a point that is telling everyone that people can unite and not be divided by something.
What it looks like from the outside would appear, as some media outlets have been reporting, that this is like some kind of autonomous state that's been formed within Washington State, within the United States of America, when in fact, we don't really know what this is.
We're not receding from the United States. We're not claiming to be separate. Mm-hmm. What we are we're holding an area just to send a message, and people are listening.
The tragic murder of Floyd has mobilized not just the black communities, but many of the country's white citizens, fed up with generations of racial profiling of African Americans and other U.S. minorities. But the quest to tackle racism embedded within various federal and state laws is a lengthy process. What obstacles actually exist in the lengthy path to end racism and police brutality in America?
Currently, police officers are given free rein in our communities, black and brown communities, to murder us, to harass us, to intimidate us, to kill us, and they're currently not being held accountable for the crimes that they commit. And we're seeing this now. This uprising has been going on for at least 3 weeks, and during that time, the police haven't stopped killing people. In fact, they've killed 120 people since the death of George Floyd nationwide.
Making efforts to silence the angry protesters has made President Trump sink in polls furthermore. Take the 14-point disadvantage against his rival, former Vice President Biden, as reported by various polls. Refusing to take part in the national conversation about race, let alone leading it, could slim Trump's chances of re-election in the 2020 election.
Today is about pursuing common sense and fighting for a cause like we seldom get the chance to fight for. We have to find common ground. but I strongly oppose the radical and dangerous efforts to defend, dismantle, and dissolve our police departments, especially now when we've achieved the lowest recorded crime rates in recent history. Americans know the truth. Without police, there is chaos. Without law, there is anarchy. And without safety, there is catastrophe. We need leaders at every level of government who have the moral clarity to state these obvious facts.
This is while trust in police has dramatically decreased among African Americans, with only 33% acknowledging that they count on the police to protect them and their loved ones. Meanwhile, more and more white people are breaking the silence towards racism and acknowledging the significance of the Black Lives Matter movement, according to polls.
Is that I've seen a lot of white people step up and act as a barrier between the crowds and the police and whoever. And I think that is actually effective because, you know, racist people don't want to shoot white people. And so we're seeing that like this tactic has been helping to kind of slow down that violence. And also cops as well. We've seen that the cops are less likely to run into a mob of people if they know that, you know, they have to go through a barrier of white people. So I think folks on the ground are like learning and, you know, seeing this challenge and we're trying to overcome it. And that gives me hope.
The big change the US is going through is also reverberating across the globe, particularly in the rest of the white world, where protesters are facing off right-wing activists on the streets. With violence on the rise in protests, the US appears to be treading the path of a civil war. At no point in the recent history of America did the country's men and women take on the establishment in such a grave manner.
We may all come from different places and different backgrounds. We're united by our desire to ensure peace and dignity and equality for all Americans. I've just concluded a meeting with incredible families, just incredible families that have been through so much. The families of Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean, Antoine Rose, Jamel Roberson, Adiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Darius Tarver, Cameron Lamb, and Everett Palmer. These are incredible people.
Criticism is not only directed at the office of the president and the police department, but also at the Democratic establishment, which is trying to stay relatable in the national conversation. The murder of Floyd has indeed widened the gap already existing in America, furthermore eroding trust in state and federal offices and institutions.
We're seeing, you know, this violence begin to show up more and more and more. Of course, we know about Heather Heyer in 2017, who was run over after a right-wing person drove a car through a protest. And so, unfortunately, we are seeing these things increase. We are also seeing, though, people, you know, Black and brown people stepping up to protect themselves. And I think the one thing that gives me hope in this moment is knowing that Black and brown people outnumber both, you know, these right-wing people, but also the cops as well. And I think another thing that's given me hope.
Activists shouting in the streets today are angry, yet hopeful to bring about real change and tackle institutional racism for good. The task is a grueling one, involving complex cultural traces that date back to days of slavery. But George Floyd's death appears to have brought back the essential focus.
And the tough part is, nobody has all the answers. If my generation did, trust me, we'd have fixed all of this a long time ago. But that doesn't mean we should feel hopeless. Just the opposite. Because what we finally do have is focus. We see what's happening in stark relief. We see how these inequalities are playing out on our streets. And it's not just the communities most affected by these challenges that see it now. It's folks all across the country.
The youths of today are finally realizing what matters and needs to be shouted in the streets in the absence of actual democracy. Despite brutal crackdown in the protests, the US still claims, shamelessly, that it is the world's leading advocate of human rights. While in reality, the US has been bullying other nations for what it calls the violation of human rights for years, some true and some false. Today, however, the world knows for a fact that the United States has a serious human rights problem, as can be seen in the streets.
This is the first time that I've seen so much support for the Black Lives Matter movement. I've never seen people who aren't political or people who aren't Black and brown talking about this. And I feel like right now we're seeing a real change where people are now opening up and people are coming together, you know, to stand up for Black lives. Of course, there's still so much work that we need to do. But I think because of this pandemic, you know, folks are out of work, you know, folks are really feeling like, you know, the government didn't take care of them. Folks are, of course, really upset with Donald Trump and everything that he's put us through for the past 4 years.
If you lived in a country where the color of your skin got you killed for driving, jogging, sleeping, yelling, parking, babysitting, sitting in a van, selling CDs, selling cigarettes, opening the door, walking at night, wearing a hoodie at night, holding a toy gun, lying on the ground, being homeless, being in a dark stairwell, holding a cell phone, having a broken taillight, exercising horses, having a bottle of pills, shopping at Walmart, holding a BB gun at Walmart, holding a phone in your own backyard, eating ice cream in your own house, and shopping, you would say that is a lawless country. Who the is running the show? Al-Shabaab? By the way, hands down, funniest sounding terrorist organization.
Bullying the ICC. The Trump administration is waging a full-fledged battle against the International Criminal Court over a decision to investigate war crimes in Afghanistan. The ICC has clarified that war crimes by all sides would be probed, but the US is the one basically panicking, which already says a lot about who could be culpable. War hawk Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is leading the attempt to sabotage any investigation finding dirt on US soldiers in Afghanistan.
The United States is not a party to the ICC. We will take all necessary measures to protect our citizens from this renegade, unlawful so-called court.
The ICC has asserted that such an investigation, some 2 years in the making, is crucial in the absence of relevant national proceedings against those who appear to be most responsible for the most serious crimes.
Well, there's a history of the United States being afraid of the ICC on other issues than Afghanistan. I think the United States is concerned and should be that it will not withstand our presence in Afghanistan will not stand international legal scrutiny. There's something natural about that somebody who is perpetrating a crime is going to be nervous about any court or jurisdiction that's going to be investigating those crimes.
The 2001 invasion of Afghanistan and following occupation by the United States have brought about the longest war in US history. Stuck in the never-ending skirmishes of the war-ravaged country, the leaders of the US and its allies have been obsessed with escaping the quagmire, yet to no avail.
Today I'd like to update the American people on the way forward in Afghanistan and how this year we will bring America's longest war to a responsible end. We have now been in Afghanistan longer than many Americans expected. But make no mistake, thanks to the skill and sacrifice of our troops, diplomats, and intelligence professionals, we have struck significant blows against al-Qaeda's leadership. We have eliminated Osama bin Laden, and we've prevented Afghanistan from being used to launch attacks against our homeland. 2014, therefore, is a pivotal year. Together with our allies and the Afghan government, we have agreed that this is the year we will conclude our combat mission in Afghanistan.
Just like former US President Barack Obama, President Trump has vowed to end the war by withdrawing the troops. But will the exploitation of the resourceful country end as well? Washington is coming to terms with its defeat in Afghanistan. It took 18 years of war, some 2,400 Americans, and more than 150,000 Afghan lives for Washington to acknowledge the failure in the unwinnable war allegedly against the Taliban.
It's a misnomer to call this any kind of peace deal. Just as I was saying about in terms of the criminal court, what the United States has been doing in Afghanistan for more than these 19 years that our troops have actually been there has been a criminal enterprise. And the Taliban is also a criminal gang, and so what we have is not so much what we usually think of as a peace deal. This is the rival gangs who are coming to an agreement.
Nearly 2 decades after former President George W. Bush's initiative to avenge the 9/11 attacks, the US still fears that withdrawing from Afghanistan will turn it into a haven for terrorists to stage attacks against the US homeland. But still, the US Army fears transparency about war crimes committed within its ranks in Afghanistan.
There was not an interest of justice to move forward with the investigation, partly because there wasn't cooperation from the parties, and the political situation was changing there, so the likelihood that an investigation would be successful was low, and that's why they rejected it. Now, what happened in March was that the appeals chamber overturned that and said the prosecution can go ahead and start that full investigation, including for U.S. Armed forces and CIA members. And that's really what's, it seems as though, has caused the Trump administration to.
For years, the Taliban has been sold to the US nation as a brutal enemy made up of fundamentalist terrorists. After years of deceiving the American public into assuming that the United States is winning in Afghanistan, Washington is today rushing to clean up evidence of war crimes and halt any investigations capable of tracing blood on the hands of American military commanders and personnel.
4 years ago, after so many years of war, Donald Trump was the only candidate for president who said that he would get the troops out of Afghanistan. That was a campaign promise. And in August of 2017, he announced that he was not going to do that the troops were going to stay. And people in the media and the government who had been very, very critical of Donald Trump up to that point were saying, now he's being presidential. He's continuing the war in Afghanistan. It's not going to end after all. And I'm sure that there was relief in the offices of Lockheed Martin and Boeing and the other arms manufacturers here in the United States.
But why is the United States afraid of the ICC investigation into war crimes in Afghanistan? Targeting the independence of the ICC and its ability to operate sends a clear signal to investigators.
That in support of her request for authorization of investigation into the situation in Afghanistan, the prosecutor presented information relating to numerous incidents which, in her view, established a reasonable basis that crime under the jurisdiction of the court have been committed.
The fact that Washington is attempting to curtail the probe suggests the ugly facts that it could come up with war crimes and other atrocities committed in Afghanistan. Put simply, if the United States was aware of its clean slate in Afghanistan, it would have no good reason to confront an international court.
Today is an important day for the course of justice in the situation of Afghanistan, for the court, and for international criminal justice more broadly. The office will now proceed to conduct a diligent and thorough investigation into this situation. The investigation will be independent, impartial, and objective. This is what the office is legally mandated to do, and it is what we are committed to doing.
President Trump went as far as declaring a national emergency, not about the COVID-19 pandemic or police brutality and nationwide protests, but about the ICC's probe. The significance of the ICC's move was nowhere shown better than by Trump's own words. He described the international institution as an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States.
It will have a very hard time because the United States is committed to not cooperating. Their investigators are having hard times getting visas. There's even been talk about criminalizing the investigation and the police here in the United States putting a stop to it.
Despite Washington's sanctions, the ICC has vowed to continue its search for evidence of war crimes in Afghanistan.
We cannot, we will not stand by as our people are threatened by a kangaroo court. And indeed, I have a message to many close allies around the world. Your people could be next, especially those from NATO countries who fought terrorism in Afghanistan right alongside of us.
Even without an ICC investigation, there is a ton of evidence for the dirty games of the United States in Afghanistan. The US invasion of the impoverished country was wrong from the get-go. It has also left the country in ruins and more unstable than ever before. As always, foreign adversaries of the United States are being blamed.
We are concerned that foreign powers like Russia are also manipulating the ICC in pursuit of their own agenda. The measures announced today are an important first step in holding the ICC accountable for exceeding its mandate and violating the sovereignty of the United States.
Despite years of investment in military campaigns, Washington is stuck in a military and intelligence fiasco, as well as the abuse of Afghanistan's resources. The ICC investigation may or may not go forward under Trump's pressure. However, the dark legacy of the US military adventurism in the region is to languish for now and for decades to come.
But what makes the story even more egregious was that they lied about even having a plan.
It's as blunt as can be. We didn't know what we were doing.
We didn't know exactly why we were there or how we could get out, and not a soul could define victory.
Retired General Douglas Lute, the Afghan war czar, saying in 2015, "What are we trying to do here? We didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking."
We didn't have a strategy. We didn't even know who the enemy was. Who were we there to fight?
Wow. America sent its troops to Afghanistan for 18 years, and they didn't even know who they were going to fight?